Hello, Connor here again, and here we are with another classic Doctor Who review. This time, it's going to be one of the most important and integral parts of Doctor Who history. Without it, I may not be sitting here reviewing this right now, and the show may not have gone on for as long as it has. That's because this story is the Daleks. And I'm sure all of you listening know exactly what the Daleks are, and you've seen them before, but this is their debut in Doctor Who, the very second story in Season 1 of the classic series. Now, originally, the show of Doctor Who was going to be a show for children to educate them on the history of the world and science. And it was going to take them to places of the past that where major events have happened, which does happen. Like we saw in the last story, we saw the creation of fire with the cavemen in 100,000 BC. And later on in the season we see lots of historical episodes. But one man, Terry Nation, had a different idea. He decided that he was going to integrate aliens into Doctor Who, and he was going to write his own type of story with what was at the time referred to as silly robots and action, which was not appropriate for this TV show. This is not what BBC wanted. But seeing how brilliant this script was, it got passed through, and had this story not gotten passed through, this show might have been over within a few years. But this story was so monumental and never seen before that it was allowed to be part of the series, and it became one of the most iconic and classic episodes of all time in Doctor Who. And it is really, this is when Doctor Who began as the iconic TV show that it is, with this story, The Daleks, a 7-part epic on Skaro. So, let's get into the synopsis. The TARDIS has brought the travellers to the planet Skaro, where they meet two indigenous races, the Daleks, malicious mutant creatures encased in armoured travel machines, and the Thals, beautiful humanoids with pacifist principles. They convince the Thals of the need to fight for their own survival. Joining forces with them and braving Skaro's many dangers, they launch a two-pronged attack on the Dalek city. The Daleks are all killed when, during the course of the fighting, their power supply is cut off. Now that is 2 paragraphs of a synopsis, but it barely does any justice to what this story really is. So, the TARDIS lands the crew on Skaro, and Susan looks at the radiation monitor, and it seems alright, and she walks away, and then it goes right up to danger zone. That was the last cliffhanger from the Firemaker that we saw. So obviously, there is a danger on this planet. And they go outside and everything, it just looks so dark and dead. And I love the effect that they used to make this planet look dead. It's actually pretty damn good for 1963. How everything is so black, like it's a forest, but it's not a forest. It's very metallic and dark and dead and ruined. And I really liked that kind of effect that they used. What I kind of like in this is that because it's rough between the Doctor and Ian and Barbara, it's very, very rough in the beginning of the season and their adventures. They're still sort of clashing a bit. I like how at the start of the story we actually get to hear Ian and Barbara firing back at him when the Doctor is out of the scene. Barbara says something along the lines of, don't you think sometimes the Doctor might deserve something? Like, it really suggests, like, she wants to give him a smack over the head or something. It's pretty funny. As they travel around, they spot the city of Skaro, and I just think it's a really nice landscape there. The backdrop to the set is really good. How big it looks and how grand it is. It really sets the tone for the story. Also, something in all throughout the story that's excellent is the sound, the music, and just the overall sound of this story is absolutely perfect. How there's ambient noise to make you feel like that this really is a dead planet, and there's this one soundtrack that plays all throughout the episode, and it's sort of like a mysterious reverse hi-hat or something, but it's not a drum, it's sort of like a... And it's really mysterious, and I love it. It just plays all throughout the episode every now and then, and every time it does it, you really get the sense that, oh, there's danger around, but you don't know when it's coming. There was a little moment I noticed where the Doctor was saying, talking about the difference in age between him and Susan and how they have different views or something. And I just sort of thought, I wondered, what is the actual age gap between them? Because obviously we know that they're not humans, they're Time Lords. It wasn't like that back then, it wasn't revealed, but we know now that they're Time Lords. I just wonder what the actual age gap is between them. If any of you actually know, maybe you could leave a comment and actually actually say what the age gap was between them in this time, because I'm actually quite fascinated by Time Lord's sort of age, or whatever. One other thing that I noticed in this story that's quite fascinating is the TARDIS has a food machine, and I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen it in any other story before. I was just quite surprised that this was in it, and it was actually sort of it was quite entertaining to see that the TARDIS can make food for you, and there's some good little funny banter there. It's just a little scene that was sort of adds to the TARDIS's character, I guess. It's got so many different utilities on it. Also, the whole reason why the story even happens in the storyline is that Ian and Barbara want to leave the planet because they want to be, in safety. But obviously, the Doctor wants to travel around. But obviously, if you've seen this episode now, you'll know what the outcome is. But the Doctor fakes that the TARDIS is the fluid link. It's broken and it's out of Mercury, so that they have to travel and find Mercury from the city. But obviously, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's just I love the cockiness and the cheekiness that he shows when he's saying, "Oh, well, it must be broken. I guess we'll have to go down. We don't have a choice." And it was just quite funny. I love his cheeky laugh. And of course, they travel down to Skara City, and they can't. There's no one there. Why is there no one there? And they walk inside, and obviously, they're just trying to explore and find any people, or they're trying to find the Mercury for the fluid link, so to say. And of course, that ends up they end up splitting up. Barbara splits from the rest, and it goes to that iconic cliffhanger of Barbara against the wall getting approached by the Dalek, and she lets off that howling scream. It's so loud, and it's just such a great cliffhanger. It's still to this day one of the best cliffhangers in Doctor Who. I really love it. Then we get to a second part of the story. The other three are still looking for the Mercury, so to say. The Doctor isn't. He's just looking around. He's looking around at all the things he can see, and then he ends up revealing to Ian that he didn't actually need the Mercury, and Ian gets so mad at him for this, and it just sort of shows like how Ian his trust is shaken with the Doctor, because he's just thinking, you're just such an irresponsible old fool. You're risking our lives here potentially, and the Doctor says, of course not. There's nothing wrong. And then of course they read one of the machines, the radiation machines, and they realise that it is actually dangerous and they need to get back to the ship or they're going to die. And then the Doctor The doctor says, "Oh, we have to go back to the ship now." And then Ian, he insists that they go and find Barbara, and the doctor says, "There's no time. We shall go." And then Ian says, "No, we are going to wait for Barbara." And then the doctor says, "Well, guess what? You can stay here, and Susan and I will go back to the TARDIS." And it just shows that he just does not give a damn for Ian and Barbara. And even though they're travelling with him, he just does not care about them. They walk outside the room, and there's just Daleks swarmed around them, and they're just suddenly in fear, of these creatures, these machines. And it's just great how instantly, when you look at these Daleks, like if you had never seen Doctor Who before and you look at a Dalek, you just sort of think, that's sort of just like sort of looks like a rubbish bin with a bunch of props on it. But because these characters, as soon as they see these Daleks, they act in fear. It's such a good way of making them dangerous from a good first impression, so that you never actually are misconceived by these Daleks. The characters selling the impact of these Daleks is very important to making these Daleks feared, and I just think it's great how they made it so imperative that the characters have to fear the Daleks. Obviously, on from here, Ian tries to run away and he gets shot by a Dalek, and I was interested in how they actually, at this point in time, the Daleks paralyze, but they don't actually kill. In some of the recent years, I think, I would argue, in the Stephen Moffat era of the show, the Daleks, they've sort of been misused, and they've been, in the story, they're as powerful as ever technology-wise. They have, there's lots of them, they shoot lasers, and they're so powerful and whatever, but you just don't feel scared of them. And then these Daleks, from the very beginning, they don't even kill, they just paralyze, yet they're so intense, you're scared of them. Even though they don't kill, you're still scared of them because of the way they're portrayed. It's not about whether or not they have the biggest gun or the most powerful laser or whatever, how many of them there are. It's about getting this perception across that they have power over the characters. They have command, and that's more important than the size of the weapons, the power of the weapons. It's more important to establish that these Daleks are in control, and that's what strikes the fear in the characters. And that's just brilliant writing by Terry Nation right there. They get put in the sort of the jail room. It's not really a jail room, but they get put in a room because they're captured by the Daleks. And one thing that I've always noticed about Barbara is that she's very conscious of beings. Especially, she's very human, you could say. She's always thinking about, the well-being of people and beings and creatures and whatever. And I liked how it was her that sensed straight away that there was a being inside of the Daleks, that they weren't just robots, that they could actually think. And I think that was great for her character, because that's a trait that her character has. Another thing I noticed is that there's a lot of the use of talking about drugs in this episode, how a drug would heal the radiation. And I don't know, it's just sort of like, in the politically correct world we live in today, like I feel like I just don't think drugs really get used. Like the word drug doesn't really get used in modern Doctor Who, and I sort of thought, hang on, this is a bit different. Obviously back then drug must have been much more commonplace, but yeah, that was interesting. It's straight away established when the Daleks are all together discussing that they have formed a dictatorship, which plays a big part in the Daleks themselves for the remainder of them in the series. They're always for dictatorship, which in the world we live in, the Western world we live in today, and in fact a lot of the places, dictatorship is something that a lot of us, we just sort of frown at and say, that's not right. But the great thing about this story, I think, is that it's not as black and white as you think it is. There's actually a lot of writing from Terry Nation in this story that shows that there's actually a lot of grey areas between everyone involved in this episode, and I think that's also great, and I'll get onto that later. So Susan is sent by the Daleks to get the healing drugs from the TARDIS, because it's revealed, or the Doctor says to the Daleks that he has a drug that could heal the radiation. One of them just has to go and find it, and Ian volunteers, but he's just so weak from the radiation he can't feel his legs, so Susan goes out, and I thought the running scene was interesting, how they don't actually show them running through. I mean, obviously these are sets, not locations, so they can't just be running through big areas, but I was interested in how the way they shot this, how they sort of had her running on the spot where they had the background going past her. Sorry. Also, another thing I noticed is that Susan's quite a high-pitched damsel. Just the way she screams at everything when there's something dangerous. It's just very typical, you could say. One thing that really moves this story along in every episode is the sense of urgency. They're always adding things to it to make you feel like that you need to keep moving, otherwise, someone's going to be in danger. And and Susan stops in the TARDIS, and she's just taking a breath, but then she remembers what Ian said and how he said that an hour could make a difference. So she was right back outside the TARDIS because there's a sense of urgency there, and that's great. I really like how in episode 3 it really shows that there is a grey perspective on the mutation, because these Thals, who are sort of, I guess you could say, they're opposite to the Daleks in a way, but they were the same beings before, but they suffered a full rotation of the mutation that it brought them back to being perfect again, you could say. And it really shows it sort of thinking, mutation's not exactly good or bad, it's just evolution, really. It's just how things change, and that's really grey, and it's quite complex if you think about it. And obviously the Thals, if you're thinking along the lines of perfection, if you look at the Thals, they're well built, they're good looking, they're all blonde haired, so they sort of have like this divine look to them. But they are more mutated than the Daleks, which is such an interesting contrast. It's very strange. Another thing that I like about the Daleks is that they're very cunning, and everything is meticulous, and they've planned it all out, and they're not aggressive. They don't go right ahead at anyone. They plan everything out, and if they need to, they hide behind corners. That's always interesting. And it shows sort of like they aren't robots. They think for themselves, and they are smart, intelligent creatures. And another thing that adds to the greyness of this story is when the TARDIS team is all together. Back when when Susan goes back to the chamber with the drugs, and she meets back up with Dr. Ian and Barbara. They clash over the allegiance. The Doctor's sort of thinking, these Daleks seem like really intelligent life forms, because up to this point the Daleks have captured them, but they've also sort of cunningly treated them well, given them food and water, and the Doctor's sort of saying, these Daleks, they're quite intelligent life forms, and then but Ian and Barbara don't trust them because they're so different. It's very interesting how because the Doctor doesn't see the Daleks as aliens, he sees them as interesting, whereas Ian and Barbara, because they see them as different, and because they're humans and they feel like being captured is such a bad thing, they don't trust the Daleks, and they trust the Thals, and the Doctor's sort of questioning, he's like, who are we to trust these Thals? And I really liked that, actually. I also notice in this, as opposed to much more modern Doctor Who stories, usually the Doctor sort of goes into stories knowing everything about everything and just fills you in. But I like how he actually doesn't know a lot in this story. He's finding out things, and he has theories. He has very brilliant theories, of course, because the Doctor's bright, but I like how the Doctor is working this all out, and it's just such a different way of him doing things than we're used to. I think the whole staged assault. There's a staged assault where the Dalek is coming in on time, on a certain time, where it's going to serve them food and water, and they do a staged assault where they rip the Dalek apart. No, they hold it down, and Barbara, she puts mud on a bit of floor and on like a tarpaulin or something, and because the Daleks work off static electricity, they push the Dalek onto the mud and it malfunctions. And I think that's just really brilliant, just like a simple scientific way to stop a Dalek. And of course they open up the Dalek, and Ian tells Susan and Barbara to go outside because they don't want to see what's inside this Dalek. And it's revealed it's a grotesque inside, and it's not actually shown fully what they look like. They hide it it's sort of almost like they brush it under the rug in this story, and I just think that's really interesting. They don't fully show what's inside these Daleks. They brush it under the rug, but on the cliffhanger you just see a little glimpse of what's inside this Dalek, and it's sort of moving under the rug, and that's just such a tease for later on when we actually see what's inside these Daleks. And then Ian gets inside a Dalek because they're trying to escape. Like it's almost like it's like when Ian's inside the Dalek, he's escorting them out and taking them somewhere else. But then of course that plan fails, and the Doctor, Susan, and Barbara have to run to the elevator, and it's all very tense because the Daleks are trying to get to them, and there's a wall that's locked, and they're using a classic burn technique, where the Daleks are burning through a wall to get to them, and it's very tense. It's just it's so pacey how, the Doctor, Susan and Barbara are going up this elevator, and then they get to the top floor, and then they have to send it back down, and as that's happening, Ian's trying to get out of the Dalek, and the Daleks are burning through the wall, and you have no idea, is Ian going to make it out of the thing in time? And then of course he gets out, and then as he's getting out, he's running to the elevator, and then they burn the door down. It goes down, and he goes up the elevator, and then the Daleks go over to the elevator, and they use their technology to try and stop the elevator from moving, and then just in the nick of time, Ian manages to jump out the elevator before it stopped, and it's really good pace here. And of course, the classic line where the Daleks say they have to be exterminated, and of course that catchphrase has stayed with the show for many years. And of course, outside they meet up with the Thals, and they're about to go back inside, and the Daleks are they're hiding behind corners, and they're not facing them straight on. They're being cunning. And as the Thals and the TARDIS team, they go inside Skaro again, the Skaro buildings. The Daleks hide behind the corners, and then they come, and then when they're all inside the buildings and they think it's all clear, the Daleks come out, and there's a big assault, and many Thals are attacked, and they have to run. And I also was interesting how the Doctor, he doesn't actually care for the Thals at this point. He cares for his own life, which is very, very different to how later Doctors would be doing this. Obviously, over the story arc, he changes, and he becomes much more caring for others than himself, and I think how that's a story arc is really cool. Because obviously, if you've seen the series 10 finale, it's a completely opposite perspective when the Doctor gives that speech. And anyway, that's enough I'll say about that. I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who hasn't seen it. Another thing I noticed about this story is that Ian is always trying to be the hero. He's always trying to be in charge of things. He's always trying to be in command, and I think in this story, he sometimes, when he clashes with people inside, he's sort of thinking, am I really always right? Am I, should I be thinking about, should I really be, listening to others rather than trying to take charge? Obviously, he'd be used to taking charge being a school teacher, but it's interesting to see him sort of question his morals. There's a good scene where Ian's talking to the Thals, and he says, and the reason the Daleks are afraid is because you're different. You're different to them. And it really shows that the Daleks have xenophobia, and it plays into that whole fascist dictatorship that the Daleks have. And obviously they're out now. They escaped, and the TARDIS team is ready to leave. And it's been 4 parts, so The last story was 4 parts. You'd expect at this point, okay, yeah, they're gonna go home now, and then it's revealed that Ian lost the fluid link. The Daleks took it off him, and it extends the story even more. So it sort of gives it a reason to keep going, which I think is really good. 7 parts is really difficult to keep up, like the pace of the story, especially if you're watching it all in one go. But I think the twist that the Daleks took the fluid link off Ian is a really good way of extending the story even more for 3 more episodes, which means they have to go back into Skaro and get the fluid link to escape in the TARDIS. In the next episode, there's a really great 4-way argument between the Doctor, Susan, Ian, and Barbara. They all show different perspectives. Again, it's pushing forward that grey areas idea of the episode. Just blurring the lines. You don't know what's right and what's wrong. And it's a really great scene when Ian tests the nerve of the Thals. Like because the Thals don't want to fight. They're being pacifists. They don't want to fight the Daleks because they've already been in a war. But then Ian says, what if I take this box with all of your history and memories in it of the Thals, and I take it and sell it to the Daleks for the fluid link. And for a second they say they're a bit hesitant, but then the leader of the Thals says, no, we shall live on in peace. And then he says, well, what if I take a hostage? And then he takes one of the women, and then the Thals punches him in the face, and he's like, well, so I guess you will fight for something. And you see a change in the Thals. It was sort of just like the moment to sort of say, being pacifists, it's great for not wanting to promote war, but when you're sometimes when you're helpless and you're going to die, you have to fight for your life. And that was the whole point of this sort of scene here. And then there's another part where the Daleks, they're using the drugs that was given to them by Susan, and they test it on a room of Daleks, to stop the radiation. And then they notice that when the drugs are added, the Daleks don't become functional anymore. The Daleks have stopped being the Daleks, and so they stop the radiation. And the whole thing with that is that they're seeing themselves change, and they don't like the change. They're saying stop the anti-radiation. We cannot function without it. So they're sort of saying we need radiation to live, and it's all about the perspective of it. How they believe that how they are now is right, and they don't want to change. And it's another thing that leads into the whole fascist dictatorship regime of it, is that they believe that they are in the right, even though they are radiated. One quote that I really liked from the Daleks was that they said, "We do not have to suit the environment. We will change the environment to suit us." That is point blank exactly what a fascist dictatorship would say. They are not going to suit the environment. They're going to change the environment to suit them. And then straight after this was another quote from I think it's from the Thals, and they say, "There is no indignity in being afraid to die, but there is a terrible shame in being afraid to live." And that's sort of the speech that gets them all. Changes their mind to want to go and be part of this expedition to help save their lives by fighting the Daleks. As they're going through the jungle, there's a lot of great audio there that makes you feel like you're really in a jungle. It's quite sort of insecty and moist. You could say that. I don't know what the better words would be to describe it, but that's just how it is, really. And then there was this one little strange scene I couldn't really understand. How there was like a monster coming out of the mutation lake, and then Ian goes to sleep, and then there's like an ad break, sort of like an ad break fade out, and then he wakes up and he's like, "Oh, why didn't you wake me up?" It was so bizarre. I didn't understand it, but I guess for the purposes of the show they needed an ad break, but it just didn't really make any sense. But then yeah, they plot to go to split up, and one half of the team will go through the usual way to the city, and the other will go through the mountain caves, which leads to the sixth episode. One of the Thals gets trapped by the water and killed, which is once again, it's sort of the, bringing back that tension to the story. And I actually really thought that the water effects that we used in the lake were actually really, really good for its time. They actually looked pretty convincing, like they were actually pretty damn good. But yeah, once again, the tension of the story is building again, and it's just so important that's in a 7-part story, you need that tension to keep it going. They go back over to the Skaro set, because with the other team that's going through the city, and it didn't look the same as in the beginning. In the beginning, it was quite a sort of like beautiful city with lots of big structures, and then they went over it to it again in this episode, and it just sort of looked like a bunch of toys. It was very bizarre, like how sort of tacky it looked in comparison to the beginning of the story. But it's just a nitpick, really. I found it interesting how when the Daleks were using radio transmission, the visual signal on their screen was this. It was just like it was like the same sort of animation as the title sequence of the show. That was interesting. Another thing, that's, in fact, it's probably applies to a lot of the 60s Doctor Who in general, but it's especially in this cave scene here, as they're going through the mountain caves, is just the black and white colours and the shadowing. It's like I guess you could say in photography these days it might be a bit overused, but I don't know, there's just something about the whole look of the black and white, and it reminds you of sort of the film noir era, and there's just something so cool and enigmatic about it. Like, you just sort of, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but it just looks so cool. They have to travel through this mountain cave to get to where the Daleks are, and it could have very easily been quite a dull episode, where not much happens and they're just sort of traveling. But it's great writing here how they keep the sense of danger going. How like Barbara has to hold a rope for one of the Thals to get down into the cave, and she slips and the rope goes and the Thal falls. He doesn't die, but it's just like the music and the way the scene's shot, it's still, the danger's still there. And then it happens again as one of the Thals is doubting himself, and then he's saying, "What, I want to go back," and then the other one says, no, we have to keep going. And then one of the rocks is going to fall from the side, and he pushes him. They pushes him out of the way, and there's just like this sense of danger that like at any time these characters could just die. And obviously the rocks fall and they can't go back, so they have to keep going forward. In between all this cave exploration, the Doctor and Susan are making their way into the city again. And I noticed that when the Doctor is with Susan and he's not with Ian and Barbara, he shows a much more happy side to his character. It shows the contrast, how like he really, really cares about Susan, and he really loves her, and they have a strong connection. He's very happy around her, and it's very different to the much more sort of arrogant tone he shows around Ian and Barbara at this time. And of course, then Doctor and Susan get captured by the Daleks, and then there's the scene where they have to jump over it's sort of a crevice over, so like from one rock to the other side, and it's a very small landing area. And of course Ian goes first because he's trying to be the hero here. He's trying to save the day. And then the first time I was watching this episode, the 6th episode of the Daleks, I just sort of thought, what is the point of this scene? Why is this happening? Why am I watching all of these characters jumping over a hole in the ground? It just seems sort of pointless. Like, it was very routine. It was going through it, and each character it's just sort of like they're jumping over, and it's the same thing's happening over and over. You're just like, what's happening? Why is this happening? Why is this necessary? But then of course there's the last Thal, which was the one who wanted to go back before, and you see him looking down at the hole, and he's got this look of fear on his face, and he's questioning himself, and you just hear this very quiet sort of drumbeat, like just sort of building up. It's like, oh, like there's a lot of tension with this one. And of course he ties the rope to himself and he jumps and he doesn't make it and he's hanging by the rope off the cliff. It's like a literal cliff hanger. He's actually hanging from the cliff. And it was actually the first time I watched it, I was actually quite surprised. I was like, oh, and it clicked to me and it made sense. I was like, oh, that's why, that's why we had to, we had to see all these characters jump over it, because it sort of made us forget that there was, obviously there was built up tension before, there was danger, there was a couple of different moments where we thought, maybe one of them was going to die, but then there was a little bit of time there that let us relax and sort of think, oh, all's going well, and then the danger comes right at the end and we're brought right back to the tension again. It all comes together as he's hanging from that cliff, and it looks like Ian and this one of the Thal that's holding the rope might actually fall as well, and it's really tense. And of course we get to the final episode now of the Daleks. The Thal is hanging from the cliff on the rope, and he's saying, it's I can't get myself up, help, and Ian and the other Thal are trying to help them, but then Ian and the other guy are being dragged, and it looks like they're about to all fall down the cliff. And the Thal, he cuts the rope and commits suicide basically to save the lives of everyone else. And it was just so impactful the first time I saw it. I didn't really expect that to happen. This is a family show that they would have shown back in the 60s. I think it was around about like 5:30 p.m. There were kids watching this, and oh my god, suicide from a character, it's just such a big, a big thing to have in a show like this. I just thought that was very impactful, and obviously, as you can see, Terry Nation is a very heavy writer with his stories, and that's why they're so good, because he's not afraid to go outside the sort of the barriers of family TV. He's going to push the boundaries to make you be emotionally invested in the story. There's a little conversation between the Doctor and the Daleks, and the Doctor is saying, "Don't kill us. I have a machine that can travel through space, and you'll be able to go to other places, but I have to be the one to show you how to do it." And the Daleks are saying, "Well, you would take us. We will find this machine." And the Doctor says, "Oh no, you need me to operate it, and you won't be able to do it without me." And the Daleks say, "Every problem has a solution." And I think that's a great quote from the Daleks. Every problem has a solution, because that's just, once again, bringing forth that fascist view that they have. Every problem has a solution. And it's also quite ironic when you see the camera first person view of the Daleks, sort of their scanner. It's actually shot as tunnel vision. And I think that's really ironic, because metaphorically they also have tunnel vision because they're fascists. And it's just so well done how Terry Nation thought up of all of this, all of these character traits for these Daleks. And it's probably the main reason why they've lasted the test of time. They're still around. They're the most iconic villain in Doctor Who, is because they're so well thought out and they have so many different characteristics to them. And once again, tension, as this great ambient sound as the B crew, you could say the cave crew, make their way through the cave and they find themselves inside the city again. They're inside the building, and there's tension again. They have the ambient sound of the building, the alien sound. It's just great. And they're going in, and there's tension. And another scene that was actually quite tense was when they were closing all the rooms. The Daleks were closing all the rooms, and they couldn't get into the main room. And there's a room that's half closed, the door is half closed, and Barbara's stuck under it, and they're all holding it. And it's just another moment in the episode that it's very tense, and it's just great how this entire sort of 1 or 2 episodes in between when they've last seen the Daleks is all just an adventure to get back to there. And every so often they just bring in these tense scenes to keep the story going. It's just so good how, oh my god, it's so great how even to this day when you watch this story, there's so many moments that you can hang on to and you won't get bored of it, even though it's 7 parts long. It's just so great. And then another thing that adds more tension is that the Daleks start a countdown. The Daleks are setting up another neutron bomb so that they can wipe out all other life on Skaro. and they can thrive in the fallout because they survive under radiation. That's part of their anatomy now. And they start a countdown, which gives it more tension. I think they start sort of like a minute in advance, and every second it's just sort of like it's building up to that moment. It's like, oh, they're gonna set off a neutron bomb, and the characters have to get all their plans done within this time. And it's just like it's very pacey. It just keeps it going. And of course, at the end, they destroy the Dalek apparatus, and they disable the power source for the Daleks in the city. The Doctor does with all his knowledge of the machines, the technology, and they become immobile. The Daleks become immobile, and they beg the Doctor to repair the system, and he refuses to do it. And the Doctor is he's triumphant in his defeat of these Daleks, and this is sort of like the beginning of the war between them. That continues throughout the series, but this is sort of the first time that the Doctor's sort of like, I got a one-up on you this time, as he would do many times. I love the bit at the end how Susan says to the Thal, she says, "Well, now that the Daleks are gone, you'll have enough food to feed everyone, all of the Thals." And the Thal says, "If only there had been some other way, because the Thals are pacifists and they didn't want to kill the Daleks. They only did it for their own survival." And it really showed the sort of like it brought back the whole anti-war speech of the Thals, the whole idea that they didn't want war, but they had to do it for their survival, but they didn't want to. They didn't want to do it. They didn't think it was right, and they are sort of ashamed of what they've done. Obviously it was necessary, but they are a bit ashamed of it because it is war. All throughout the story, just constant grey areas built. So complex for a story that's supposed to be a family show back in the 60s. Just absolutely brilliant writing from Terry Nation. And I love how at the end of the story, even though they've gone through all these adventures with the Doctor, he is still a mystery. And that's just, that's the charm of the show Doctor Who. You go through all these adventures with the Doctor and he is still a mystery. And you get this in a lot of episodes, how at the end of all this, all this adventure, they say, "You know what, Doctor? We still don't know. Who are you?" And I always get a smile every time that happens. There was sort of a story in this episode of like Barbara and one of the Thals sort of having like an attraction for each other. I thought it was a little bit underdeveloped. Like it wasn't really shown that much until the end. It was interesting, but it was just sort of, I didn't really think it was that necessary. But I don't know. I don't really know what to think about it, but I guess it wasn't too bad, but it was just like, I don't know. It didn't really seem like there was a point to it. And then of course at the end of the story we get a good lead into the next episode being The Edge of Destruction as the TARDIS malfunctions. And we get that cliffhanger in the closing titles. So, really, what I can say about this story, the Daleks, is that it is so important and key to the history of Doctor Who. There are so many great things about it, so many things to say. It's just such a golden piece of history in this show, and I just think it was so awesome how Terry Nation's first ever script for the show was a classic. Like it may not be my favorite episode, or maybe not even be one of the ones that I regularly want to go back and watch because I thought it was awesome. But it's just it's great. It's well written. There's not many flaws with it. It's just such a great adventure, and it brought one of the most iconic characters in television, the Daleks, and it really it gave the Doctor Who, the show, the kickstart that it needed, and I think without this episode it wouldn't be here where it is today. So my final rating for the Daleks. Although it may not be my favourite story, it is still a great story. 7-parter, and it keeps you interested the whole way. It's important to the history of Doctor Who, and I can't give it any less than an 8.5 out of 10. Some of you may think it deserves higher or lower, but I think There's other stories that I prefer to watch, but I can't rate it any lower because of how well it was written and how much impact it's had on the show. And on the next review, I'll be doing The Edge of Destruction. And some point, I'll also be doing some reviews of the modern series, and we'll also be uploading some other videos to the channel. So yeah, see you next time.